it's something to think about. Sometimes when you get really into nesting code structures, it's kind of fun, it's kind of cool, and there's really powerful things you can do within that because you do have assumed rules and constraints. But sometimes interacting with that system is going to limit creativity. Hi, I am Demon Dev, and today I've been doing some kind of brainstorming design on something that I've been approaching for a while with the Electra system, which is basically how do you navigate through such huge amounts of not just content but very specific content. And I have been drawn into building sort of a node system alongside the regular text chat output. And in the process of making the node system, I kind of came into a pattern where I structured the code in one way and then immediately realized that I wanted to use another technique. And so I thought I would kind of describe that in case it's applicable for other people, just kind of a fun programmery thing. So a lot of times you have, when you're dealing with complex data, you're nesting them within custom classes or variables. Let's see, let me switch to this as an example. I have the chapter organization system where basically you just have, there's no necessary day count to the chapters in the game. It's just kind of general progressions of in the world events. And so I kind of quickly added, okay, so in chapter one, maybe let's just assume that each chapter is a week to make this easy to deal with to begin with. So then I was like, okay, so in a run through, one of the run throughs could be, okay, in the first week on day one, during the dawn time segment, you're talking to Eve, and maybe that has some properties. Okay, then during the time period moves to the morning, so a little bit later, and then maybe you talk to Poppy, and then a little bit later in the afternoon, there's a spirit unlock event where you get pulled into the spirit world, and then during the evening, you're defeating a boss in the spirit world, and then at night you talk to Eve again, and then go to sleep. So this, makes sense. You've got this organizational structure where it's nested. It's kind of, you can see how the days fit within the weeks, the time periods within that, and then within the time periods, you've got the different events. The problem is that, well, other than just how obnoxious the number of expanding collapses there are, the problem is that it's forcing me into a design structure that is a little bit exhausting, both from a writing perspective and a programming perspective. I don't know if you had the same reaction that I had after I built it and started, just kind of adding a few items here. But it's just kind of like, oh, this game is just broken up into weeks, days, time periods. It feels very robotic. And you're fitting your story elements or what you want to write within this rigid system. It's weird to think of days and time periods and weeks or whatever as rigid because we all live within them in the world. But in a creative landscape, this is, just totally me spitballing, so I could be wrong about this, but I feel like in a creative landscape, you want to remove those sorts of constraints because you want to think in terms of character arcs and relationships. You want to think in terms of, okay, if your friendship is really high and the respect is really low, what's a conversation that can happen, with that? And, maybe it just happens after you've been spirit unlocked or something like that, because it has to do with one of the characters from that world. That's the level of design that you want to interact in. So what am I doing? Well, I started kind of building the alternative to be just like a simple, straightforward list. So what I think I'm actually going to do here is just have a list of either things. Maybe I'll do a separate one in case I want to kind of keep both systems as I compare and contrast as I'm building the early organization stuff. But maybe it would just be a do thing or something. A player do. Let's go with player do. And we'll keep a name for it. I imagine a system like this kind of works from the reverse. Instead of having assumptions nested into the thing, you have all the properties at the very bottom level. So you have a very inelegant system here. Let's do a list of these player dues. And this will just be P dues. Maybe just dues, because we'll probably be referencing this a lot. So, well, I'll jump into it. So you'll see immediately it's a lot less, fancy or it's not really any flourish going on. We're just having a straight list that could be a lot of different things happening across a lot of different things. But because we're not hard assigning the categories, we're just, doing things that can happen. Talk Eve, go school. Maybe, spirit unlocked. Get coffee. We're designing these, things that can happen outside of the constraints of time. I mean, they still will have time associated. And anyways, but because we do this, we can rearrange the order really easily without thinking too hard. Rearranging the order here for me is a little bit stress inducing. It's, you can't manually, of course I can make an custom editor script, but you can't manually drag one of these things to be during a different time of day. And the time of days should really be more reactive to a balanceable time system. We should be able to recalculate how long certain things like talking or eating or doing activities take, and then basically regenerate how long in game a certain playthrough would go. We shouldn't be hard assigning them here. It's very constricting to do it that way. So anyways, I'm finding myself, and I found this, I call it list dump, where instead of trying to be fancy about the way you think your items in a list should be organized by nesting them in this, in some ways it makes the code a lot more readable to be like day one dot, dawn, or, dot, the first item in the list is going to be the earliest part of the day. That might be very readable, but how much more dynamic and easy to move with, like, okay, get all the things that you can do at this time, pulling them from a list like this where we're not pulling them from a list like this where they're not nested in things is going to be way easier to grab, I think. And so then I would just go ahead and I've got a really cool just like an example code from online for this node editor. So that's what I'm going to be working on building. Just a little flow chart to show what the player is doing, and then the writer can react extremely specifically with those things. The player dues. Let's see, do content dues 0 theme thing. Might give me an error. We'll see. But yeah, having something like this, now there is a danger because it's not organized that you have to assign the organization somewhere. So that is a real constraint. When you take away the rules, there aren't rules, and so more chaotic things can happen. But I think from a writer's perspective, where you're going to be assigning these things, we're going to be assigning these things, having really direct control and then being able to generate the categories that they fit into in a run through is going to be a way better, application for this system. And this might not apply to every system, for sure it doesn't. But it's something to think about. Sometimes when you get really into nesting code structures, it's kind of fun, it's kind of cool, and there's really powerful things you can do within that because you do have assumed rules and constraints. But sometimes interacting with that system is going to limit creativity. Sometimes constraints limit your options, and that actually inspires creativity. But sometimes having to accept too many arbitrary rules, like, okay, what period of the day is this going towards, is not an important question, and it's very distracting. So then you feel like you have to fill out all the time, all the periods in the day with events, which could be a very boring way to inspire interesting situations. Whereas if you focus on the event items, you can generate time. You can even fast forward time or slow down time to fit important moments. And I think most games that have dynamic elements like this do take a very flexible approach with time. Pre-constraining every event to take up a specific time unit might be good for consistency and mechanical strategy for the players to interact with. But I think that should be implemented at a later stage, and maybe it has a generated like effect on what the player's actions are. Accepting that up front is, well, you don't really understand the balancing, so it's not super useful, but it's super distracting, I think. So, anyways, consider, next time you make a list with a bunch of sub lists or something like that in Unity or any kind of a project, consider the advantages of having a list dump. Just it's just a really simple class with all the properties at the immediate level. And you can generate, I can pull these objects into, a day schedule, into time periods later, but I would see that as the temporary and this list dump as the permanent, like the core, because it'll be easier to work with. Of course, you can, when there's interchangeability, you can go either way. It doesn't matter where you organize it from, but I think it will in this case because it will focus the writer's thinking about what happens, not, well, here's a time period. What can I put in there? Anyways, have a good one, and hopefully this is useful. Again, this probably can't be applied everywhere, but I think it's an underutilized tactic. Simple